I was thinking about what to minister on next. And I just happened to flip over my Bible, and my eyes fell on Proverbs 22, verse 22 and 23, which read, "Rob not the poor, because he is poor. Neither oppress the afflicted in the gate." Verse 23, "For the Lord will plead their cause, and spoil the soul of those that spoiled them." And I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting. So I kind of looked at the word poor, and it had a very little small letter to it. In other words, it was given a reference. So when I looked over in the corner of the Bible, the reference gave me Exodus 23:6, Job 31:16 to 21, Zechariah 7:10, and Malachi 3:5. Those are the four references that was given. Now this is a Schofield Reference Study Bible here. It's a study Bible. And a lot of study Bible have references to them, just, for you to go and check out other scriptures associated with what this is saying. So I checked out Zechariah 7 chapter verse 10. And this is what Zechariah 7 chapter verse 10 say. "And oppress not the widow, nor the fatherless, the stranger, nor the poor. And let none of you imagine evil against a brother, against his brother in your heart." Read that one more time. Zechariah 7 verse 10. "And oppress not the widow, nor the fatherless, the stranger, nor the poor. And let none of you imagine evil against his brother in your heart." And that's Zechariah 7 verse 10. Now, Proverbs also gave a reference to Malachi chapter 3 verse 5. Now, I already knew what Malachi chapter 3 verse 5 said because I taught on it 10, 11 years ago, I guess, maybe 12, I'm not sure. Now, Malachi 3 verse 5 says, "And I will come near to you to judgment, and I will be a swift witness against the sorcerers, against the adulterers, and against false swearers, against those that oppress the hireling in his wages, the widow, the fatherless, and turn aside the stranger from his right, and fear not me, said the Lord of hosts." Now notice that now. That's Malachi 3 verse 5. And like I stated before, I have never heard in my 50 years of church a preacher preach on Malachi 3 verse 5. I actually preached on the very short book of Malachi. All I ever heard was Malachi 3 verse 8, or starting at 7, "From the days of your fathers, You have gone away from my ordinance and have not kept them. Return unto me, and I will return unto you, said the Lord of hosts. But ye said, wherein shall we return? Then verse 8, famous verse 8. Will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me. But ye say, wherein have we robbed thee? And tithes and offerings. Ye are cursed with the curse, because ye have robbed me, even this whole nation. That's all I ever heard. Because I can remember back when I was 10 years old, a visiting preacher was talking. And as he was talking, he said, turn to the book of Malachi. So I had my little Bible, so I knew where to go. He just said Malachi chapter 1, 2, 3, or 4. He said, turn to the book of Malachi. I immediately went to Malachi chapter 3, looking at verse 8, because I knew that's where he was going. And when he finished talking or saying whatever he was saying, he started out his sermon in Malachi 3, verse 8. That was in 1960. And from that time until this very day, preachers will wear you out with Malachi 3, verse 8. Will a man rob God? Do you want to rob God? Of course not. You don't want to rob God. I don't want to rob God, but preachers will preach on this verse. They will rob you. Notice what I said. Rob you Sunday after Sunday after Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade. Notice I said rob you. Why? Because it's not talking about robbing God. By giving the pastor 10% of your income. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about robbing the poor. It's talking about robbing the poor people. And I didn't find out about this until 2005. I was 55 years old. I had been giving tithes for well over between 30 and 40 years. But I never studied all the verses on tithing. Never, never, ever, never, never. I just studied and read the short few verses that these pastors quoted, and these visiting pastors, and these visiting ministers, and these visiting evangelists quoted. The same passages over and over again. Malachi, will a man rob God? Jesus said tithe, Matthew 23, Abraham tithed before the Lord, Genesis 14 chapter, and that's about it. Oh, Jacob tithed. He promised to God he would tithe if God would bless him. But what was Malachi really talking about? It wasn't until I decided to do some in-depth study on tithing, from Genesis to Hebrews, that I found out that Malachi was really talking about robbing the poor. The Levite priests were not sharing with the poor. The Israelites brought the tithes to the, well, I don't know if they were Levites, but the scriptures just say they were priests. It could have been the Levites or the Aaronic priesthood, but it just said priests. And the priests, once the Israel brought the tithes to the priest wasn't giving God the best. Malachi chapter 1. It clearly says that. It clearly talks about that. Then it goes from chapter 1 to chapter 2, still talking about the priests. Then it started mentioning the Levites. Then it started prophesying about that he was going to restore the Levites that lived in Judah and Jerusalem. Then he gave Israel a warning. Do right by the strangers, the fatherless, and the widows. Don't oppress them. Do right by them. Malachi 3:5. So when I looked at Malachi 3:5 way back in 2005, I decided to run reference. And when I ran reference, I came across Zechariah 7th chapter, verse 10. Oppress not the widow, the fatherless, the strangers, not the poor. Don't oppress them. Then I came across Proverbs 22:22. Rob not the poor, because he is poor, neither oppress the afflicted in the gate. For the Lord will plead their cause. People, there are numerous verses in the Bible regarding taking care of the widows, the fatherless, and the strangers, according to Deuteronomy 14th chapter and Deuteronomy 26th chapter, because tithing was given to them as well. It was called the third year tithe. Every third year. The tithe was also shared not only with the Levites, but with the widows, the fatherless, and the strangers. Deuteronomy 14, Deuteronomy 26. I never heard a pastor, preacher, bishop, apostle, evangelist, whatever, tell me that. Nor did they ever read those verses. Those verses were completely ignored. But Malachi 3:8, will a man rob God, is talking about robbing the poor, robbing the widows, the fatherless, and the strangers. Proverbs 22:22 again. Rob not the poor, because he is poor, neither oppress the afflicted in the gate. For the Lord will plead their cause and spoil the soul of those that spoil them. These preachers are spoiling the widows, the fathers, and the strangers Sunday after Sunday. They are people who can barely make it. I have seen this for literally 50 years. I didn't pay any attention to it in the beginning. I really didn't. But as I got older, I started noticing things that wasn't right. I know there are Christians who have been lost their homes, lost their jobs, living in their cars. But the pastor is doing very well. People are making it from paycheck to paycheck. But the pastor is doing very well. Oh, yes, he is. All because of a misrepresentation of Malachi chapter 3, verse 8. Will a man rob God? When in reality, Malachi 3:5 is not talking to the church. Church didn't exist until Acts. It's talking to the nation of Israel about what the priests were doing. They were not doing right to God by giving God the best of the tithe in chapter 1. And they were stealing from the poor. Malachi 3, verse 5. I didn't even realize what Malachi 3, verse 5 said until I decided to study on my own. February of 2005. February of 2005 is when I decided to study all the verses of what tithing really meant and found out the truth. I had no idea I was being lied to practice all of my church life. And I don't think it was intentional by preachers. I know I taught the tithe lie. I did. I taught it as well. I did. But I was simply repeating what other preachers said. That's why I advised when I went on YouTube in 2009. I told people, look, you need to study all of these verses that mention tithing. And you need to study all the verses above that to be sure. Because a lot of these verses ties into tithing. You're going to read about the first fruits. Because the first fruits and tithes is not the same thing. Pastors don't care. They tie the first fruits with tithes because it sounds good and it can bring them more money. The first fruits is the first of the crops. The tithes is the tenth, not the first. But they don't care. These preachers don't care. They need your money first. You need to honor God first. Therefore, you need to give them 10% of your income first. See, your money is first, according to God. No, that's not what the scriptures is saying. It's first to the preacher. It's first to the pastor. It's first to the bishop or the reverend or whatever title these preachers give themselves. But tithing and first fruits is not the same thing. But these preachers don't care. They know that people are not going to check up on them. So therefore, people are going to continue to be robbed because they refuse to believe the scriptures. And they are going to continue to believe pastor and continue to be robbed Sunday after Sunday after Sunday.